The British Museum has been called the world's largest receiver of stolen goods, and a lot of you have been asking, how do they get away with it? Colonialism. The British Museum has been offering to loan stolen artifacts to the countries they belong to. So here's what you've been asking. What happens if an origin country borrows their stolen artifacts but then doesn't return them? The answer lies in British law, specifically the British Museum Act of 1963. That 60-year-old law actually forbids the British Museum from returning stolen artifacts. So British law made it illegal to give looted treasures back to the people they looted from. The British Museum website even states its wholehearted commitment to respectful collaboration worldwide to sharing and lending the collection. In other words, maintaining its colonial legacy. Next, you commented, return the Moai to Easter Island. Okay, so what are the Moai? These massive stone artifacts are called Moai, and they're from Easter Island. They were created by Rapa Nui carvers around the early 11th century. They were placed inland to watch over the local community, and they represent the faces of their ancestors. But in 1868, the British stole the Moais. 20 years later, the island was annexed by Chile. One of the two artifacts is called Ho'ahaka Nanaia, meaning lost or stolen friend. It's exhibited in the museum and could be around 1,000 years old. The other one is known as Moai Hava, also translated as lost. It's made of volcanic tuff, a type of stone, and isn't even currently on display. In 2018, the Rapa Nui community wrote a written request for the return of the two Moais. And the museum's response? It acknowledged the impact of the removal, but guess what? It didn't return them. Take a look at this page on the British Museum website. This is so interesting. It's called Contested Objects from the Collection, which lists items from its museum collection that were stolen and have been requested by their country of origin. The British Museum knows it has stuff that belong to other people, but it's holding on to them. So what other stolen objects at the British Museum have you been asking about? Let's take a look at this comment. The only reason that the pyramids of Giza were not in the British Museum is because they are too heavy to steal. So because they couldn't take the pyramids, they decided to take the remains of people and mummies instead. And whether or not human remains should be stored and displayed in museums has long been at the center of an ethical debate, but that hasn't stopped the British Museum from housing over 6,000 human remains. The British Museum says that it displays skeletal remains, bones, natural and intentionally mummified remains to help inform visitors about the past. Most of the Egyptian antiquities came to the museum when Egypt was colonized by Britain in the early 1800s. The museum has over 100,000 artifacts from Egypt, which includes more than 80 mummies, housing the world's largest collection of Egyptian antiquities outside of Egypt. You've also been asking about some of the most contested items in the museum. The Parthenon pieces. These are actually the world's most disputed museum items. Masterpieces of Greek art from the Temple of Athena in Athens, made in the 5th century. The sculptures were stolen more than 200 years ago from Greece by the British ambassador Lord Elgin. Elgin was the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire and was able to get permission to remove the sculptures. And when he brought them back to Britain, it was deemed acceptable by the Parliament. And the moment they were sold to the British Museum, their removal became illegal under British law. In 1983, Greece made a formal request for the sculptures to be permanently returned. After years of dispute, for the first time, Britain may lend the sculptures back to Greece, but only under a long-term loan agreement, to be exhibited in the Acropolis Museum. Former UN war crimes judge and human rights advocate Geoffrey Robertson previously stated that the British Museum should wash its hands of blood and return Elgin's loot. His book called Who Owns History dives into the reality on the need to return property taken without consent by colonizers throughout history, specifically over the debate of the Elgin marbles. Even though we've covered 8 stolen artifacts by the British Museum across 2 videos, there are millions more representing the legacy of British colonialism.